I woke up this morning. And I was in Australia. It's like, what the heck is up with that? This is my first time to Australia, and whenever I go someplace, I like to do a lot of research, and kind of, find out where I'm going and the history of the country and the people and all of that. When I'm doing research, I like to use very hardcore, definitive, in-depth sources. I was kind of looking into Australia a little bit, and one of the things that I did discover about Australia is that 7 of the 10 most deadly creatures in the world are from Australia, and it wouldn't surprise me if 2 of them are in this auditorium as we speak. If I was a betting man, I would assume that somebody is going to be eaten by a shark before this talk is over. So as I was doing a little bit of research on these, the 7 deadly creatures, the thing that I came to realize from all this is that pretty much everything in Australia is out to kill you. All right, so I guess it was back in February, and Robert Koo of Penny Arcade called me up and asked me if I'd do Storytime at PAX in Australia. And I was thrilled to be able to do that. I had a lot of fun, writing my speech back in 2009 at PAX Prime, and I was really looking forward to doing it again. And I had this great theme. I had this great idea that I wanted to talk about, because I wanted to talk about and tell some stories, about the creative process. And we as human beings, we have this unique ability to be creative, to create something from nothing, to form ideas that only exist in our mind and turn them into something interesting and something important, and something fun. So the next morning, I headed down to my favorite writing place, and I got my coffee, and I opened up my laptop, and I created a new document, and I flexed my fingers like this. I have no idea why people do that in movies before they're writing, but I did it. I was excited, so I placed my fingers on the keyboard, and then I stared. And I stared at this blank page for close to an hour, and nothing came. It's like I just stared. It's like I got another coffee, and I continued to stare. As I was transfixed by the utter blankness of this page, and I stared, and it stared back. It just absolutely nothing came to me. And it was this point that I had an epiphany. It was at this point that I came to realize that I don't know fuck all about the creative process. It's like I don't have a diploma in psychology. I haven't written books about creativity. I haven't done years of research on what it means to be creative. I haven't published articles in scientific journals. I haven't run experiments on people. I don't have an MRI scanner that I run people through as they're being creative. I don't have a big chart of the human brain on the wall with all the important creative parts called out. Really, about the only thing that I do know about the human brain is that it's delicious. So panic was starting to set in. This blank page was taunting me. It was just an empty sheet of whiteness. But it had this uncanny ability to cut right to the soul and pull every fear out of my heart. This blank sheet of digital paper just reached inside me. It grabbed my heart and it made it cry out. This white emptiness could make my hands tremble and sweat form on my forehead. This blank sheet of nothing had become my master. So after about an hour of this hypnotic trance of fear, I closed my document, and I opened up my email, and I wrote the following to Robert Koo of Penny Arcade. Dear Mr. Koo, I regret to inform you that I will be unable to give the keynote at this year's PAX in Australia, as I have been killed in a freak accident involving a bus and a large tub of pudding. Sincerely, the dead Ron Gilbert. Now, the irony of being in a complete creative block over writing a speech about being creative was not lost on me. And much like the human brain, irony can sometimes be delicious. So the more that I thought about this, the funnier it became. And it was the absurdity of that situation that finally freed my mind. And the task became less about describing the process of being creative and more about the journey of being creative, because it truly is a journey. It is a journey deep into your soul, and it can be scary and terrifying. It can be humbling, depressing, and agonizing. But when you end this journey, it's liberating, it's empowering, and it's exhilarating, and it's wonderful. And if it's done right, you are not the same person that started that journey. There really is nothing like creating something from nothing. There is no feeling like creating something from where nothing existed before. Now, when I was a kid, I was not a particularly creative child. I didn't spend my school days drawing pictures of superheroes in my notebooks. I didn't write stories. I rarely read books. And if it was possible for a 10-year-old to be lost, it really felt like me. And then when I was 12, it's like two things happened that changed my life, changed it absolutely and completely. Now, my father was a physicist at the local university, and one day he brought home a programmable calculator. This was a TI-59 programmable calculator, and I was fascinated with it. This was long before the home computer would make its appearance, and the little device completely obsessed me. Now, this calculator, it came with a couple of games, and they were just simple games where you guessed numbers or played a primitive version of Battleship. And this calculator could do more than just add numbers. It could make decisions and it could think. And all this was magical to me. It's like I needed to understand how it did this. So my father taught me to program it. And from that moment forward, I was completely transfixed by programming. It's like my 12-year-old life, it's like finally had meaning. Now, the other thing that happened to me was a little movie called Star Wars. Now, when Star Wars first came out, it's impossible to describe what it meant to us. It's hard to describe what that movie meant and how different it was. It's like today, all movies are like Star Wars. But back then, there had been nothing like it, ever. I mean, Star Wars was a movie that started the entire summer blockbuster. Now, Star Wars was a movie where you went into the theater one person and you came out as another. Now, being 12 years old and seeing Star Wars at that time and that age is one of those odd things that I'm very thankful for. And it changed me, and it changed every one of my friends. So you add Star Wars and that little programmable calculator together, and you have this perfect storm for a 12-year-old. I became obsessed with making Star Wars games, and it really jump-started my imagination. It's like I read everything that I could about George Lucas and the making of that movie. George Lucas and Lucasfilm and Industrial Light and Magic and everyone involved in Star Wars just became my heroes. It's like I became fascinated with the process that brought that movie into existence. I think before Star Wars, I didn't know that a movie was made and that there were scripts and writing and directing. And it opened up to me this whole world of the creative process. Now, I maintain that these are the 10 greatest words to ever appear in a movie. Now, they are simple words, and most people probably don't give them a second thought. But even at 12, sitting in that theater, watching Star Wars for the first time, when these words came on the screen, they really took my breath away. And to me, they are the true genius of Star Wars. In those 10 little words, George Lucas told us that this movie has nothing to do with us. It is not our future. These people are not from Earth. He told us that the story takes place a long time ago and far, far away. So we can shed every conception or misconception that we have or hold, that we can just let them go. It's like all the baggage of the human race can just disappear. It's like every hang-up or fear or prejudice of how things might be. When I read those words, I literally felt that baggage melt away. George was now free to do what he wanted. He wasn't beholden to us anymore. He was completely free. He was completely creatively free. In just those 10 little words, a long time ago in a galaxy far, far away. Now, with my imagination going crazy from Star Wars and being obsessed with programming, there was only really one thing I could do, and that was make Star Wars games. Now, we finally got a home computer. It was called a North Star, and it ran an operating system called CPM. Now, it had no graphics. It was just a text terminal. But that didn't stop me from making little RPGs or text-based Star Wars and Star Trek games. I built RPGs with dragons and knights that had scuba gear. I built text-based driving games where you drove an @ sign up the screen and avoided pound signs. But I was creating something new, something where there was nothing before. And then one Christmas, I got a graphics card for the home computer. Now, you hooked it up to a TV, and it did a whopping 128 by 128 pixels in 16 colors. That's right, the entire screen was 128 pixels across. People today text emoticons bigger than that to their friends. Now, this graphics card gave me the ability to head down to the local arcades, armed not with a handful of quarters, but with a pencil and a pad of graph paper. And I would copy every graphic on the screens, and I'd make notes on alien attack waves and timing, and then I would head home and I would try to reproduce these games on my computer. And after a while, I would start to experiment, changing things here and there, add some new alien ships that behave differently, adding some story, maybe some new ships. And without knowing it, I'd become a game designer, and I really knew what I wanted to do for the rest of my life. Now, when I got into university several years later, I majored in computer science. It was either that or philosophy. Now, I told my advisor that I wanted to make computer games, and he thought I was completely nuts. And you have to remember, this is like 1982, and the Commodore VIC-20 and the Apple II have just started to make their appearance. And people still treated them with an odd sense of mystery and confusion and witchcraft. So when I was in high school, I typed up this English paper on my home computer. Now, the only printer we had was a dot matrix printer. And I printed out my book report. I was thoroughly impressed with myself for using a word processor. I turned my paper in, and I got an F. I had completely failed. There was a big red F scrawled across the page. There were no reasons or notes. It was just this F. So after class, I went up to my teacher and I asked her why I'd gotten an F. And she told me in that stern way that only teachers can, I wanted you to write your paper, not your computer. I just stood there. She actually thought the computer had written my book report. I guess she imagined me down in the basement, speaking to my computer. Computer, I need an English paper, 3 pages long, double space, 1 inch margins, 3 spelling mistakes, just to make it look real. I tried to explain to her that the computer was just a typewriter. You type stuff and it showed up on the screen, and then you hit Control-P, you printed it out, but I had done all of the work. She stared at me, which seemed like several minutes, and she gave out an angry sigh, and she took my paper, she crossed off the F, and she wrote a C. Now, if that paper had been turned in, riddled with satanic symbols and splatters of chicken blood, and my book report had been written by Satan himself, I might have gotten a B. But your book report is written by a computer, and it's like, well, that's an F. So I got to university. Now, my advisor thought I was crazy for wanting to make computer games, and he spent 2 years desperately trying to talk me out of this plan. Had I considered a degree in witchcraft or maybe demonic studies, that would have been okay, but making games, that's crazy talk. Now, around this time, I got into college. I got a Commodore 64, and I started hacking the ROMs that held the basic interpreter. And I realized that I could add new commands for graphics and sounds. And I called this creation Graphics Basic. And I sent it off to a small company in California called Human Engineered Software. Now, a few weeks later, I got a letter from them saying they wanted to publish it. So I spent some time wrapping it up and polishing it. And then the next few weeks, I got a phone call asking them if they wanted a job making Commodore 64 games. Now, I was 2 years into my university degree, and taking that job would have meant quitting college. Now, my father, the PhD in astrophysics, was now the president of the university. Now I had to tell my father, the president of the university, that I was quitting his fine institution of higher learning and knowledge, a tradition that goes back 2,500 years to Plato and the ancient Greeks. I had to tell him that I was quitting all of this to go make computer games. He sat silently as I told him what I wanted to do, and then he asked me one simple question. He said, "How much are they paying you?" I told him, and his eyebrows went up. It's like, "Wow, that's more than we pay top professors. You should probably take that." So I packed up my car. Actually, I went and I bought a car. Then I packed up my car, and I moved to California. Now, I worked there for 6 months, and then they went bankrupt, and they laid me off, and I moved back home with my parents, and I got ready to enroll back in university. Now, I would be lying if I said I wasn't somewhat disappointed, nay, devastated in my short career making games professionally. It's like my epic journey to California and conquer computer games had completely failed. I had been defeated by the dragon in accounting. It's like maybe my university professor was right. Or maybe I should go major in philosophy. It's like the job prospects certainly seemed better. So one day, I was hanging out at home, waiting for the new term to start and re-enroll. And I was getting ready to have lunch with a friend, and I found my car keys, and I headed out the door. I was already outside, and I didn't really want to go back in and answer the phone. We didn't have an answering machine or any voicemail or any futuristic demonic technology like that. So I headed to my car, and the phone rang. I really didn't want to go back inside and answer the phone, but it rang again. It's like it was taunting me, mocking me to answer it. It rang, and then it rang again. It's like, fine, I'll answer the phone. So I ran back inside, and I unlocked the door, and I answered the phone. Now, on the other end was someone from Lucasfilm, and they were looking for a Commodore 64 programmer. It's like, holy crap. It's like, I didn't know that Lucasfilm made games. To me, Lucasfilm was Star Wars and Industrial Light and Magic and George Lucas, and the foundation of my entire childhood. I told them I could come in for an interview, and I packed my car, and I moved back to California. There was no way that I was not getting that job. Now, my first week at Lucasfilm Games was absolutely mind-blowing. It's like I had never met a smarter group of people in my life. I had so much to learn, and I was in just complete awe. Now, all of us were huge Star Wars fans, and here we were working at Lucasfilm for George Lucas, and Industrial Light and Magic was right across the street, and we couldn't make Star Wars games. Now, before Lucasfilm had a games group, the exclusive license to Star Wars had been given out to other companies. Now, had we been allowed to make Star Wars games, I'm sure that's all we would have made. Not being able to make them really freed us. It creatively freed us in ways that I don't think that we understood at the time. Now, without that freedom, there would be no Maniac Mansion or Monkey Island or Grim Fandango or Loom. Now, constraints and limitations can sometimes be a driving force for innovation and creative inspiration. When your brain can't do what it wants, it has this amazing capacity to figure out something else, and often something better. We should always embrace limitations and figure out ways for them to become a strength. Now, to this day, I am so thankful that we were not allowed to make Star Wars games. Now, Lucasfilm Games, now called LucasArts, shut down 6 months ago, and they were allowed to make Star Wars games. Now, one of the great things about working at Lucasfilm were all the amazing people that I got to meet. And I think one of my favorites was, hello, my slides vanished. Excellent. So I met a lot of amazing people, when working at Lucasfilm Games, and I think one of my favorite was Steven Spielberg. Now, Spielberg truly is an amazing person. Spielberg was a true gamer. It's like he really did love games. He played them a lot, and he could talk about them nonstop. And whenever he was in town visiting George, he was always drop by the games group and see what we were working on. Now, he wouldn't just stand there, nod politely as we demoed the game. You could not get 2 minutes into the demo before he was wrestling the joystick or the mouse out of your hand. Now, I grew up idolizing George Lucas and Steven Spielberg, and here I was, about to get in a fist fight with one of them over a joystick or a mouse. It was just oddly surreal to me. Now, of course, being Steven Spielberg does have its privileges. Now, when he would get stuck in Monkey Island, he would not call the 1-800 hit line or log into CompuServe. He would just call me. It's like my phone would ring, and I'd hear, "Hello, this is Diana. I have Steven on the line. He needs some hints for Monkey Island. Can I connect you?" Now, the first few times, this was thrilling. After spending 10 minutes on the phone with Steven Spielberg giving him hints on your game, you can just pretty much go home for the day. You can pretty much go home for the whole week. But after a while, I would be poking my head into Noah's office, and I'd be saying, "Spielberg's on the phone. Do you want to talk to him?" And he'd say, "No, I talked to him last time. Let's see if Dave wants to talk to him. I don't think Dave has talked to him in a while." It became this Spielberg hot potato. It's like how quickly the exciting can become the mundane. Okay, there actually is a point to this story. I got a chance to work with Spielberg on a project we did at Lucasfilm called The Dig. And this was an idea, This was an idea that Spielberg had for a game, and he wanted us to make it. And Noah Falstein and I were first of many project leads to be assigned to the project before it came out years later. Now, during one of those meetings, Spielberg said something that has stuck with me all of these years. Now, I don't remember exactly what we were talking about, but this concept of believing in what you're creating came up. And Spielberg said, you have to believe in your idea enough to dance naked on top of it. And this really stuck with me, and I think it's a critical point in the journey of creativity. If you believe in what you're making, if you believe in it so much that you will dance naked on top of it, then it doesn't matter what anyone else thinks. And we should always strive to make whatever we are making for ourselves. And we can want other people to like it and enjoy it, but at its core, you have to make it for yourself, and you have to believe in it enough to dance naked on top of it. Because if you do that, then it just doesn't matter what anyone else thinks. So 9 months ago, I finished making a game called The Cave. Now, The Cave is an adventure game about these 7 characters that go exploring this dark, sentient, talking cave. Now, the thing that always interested me about this game and the creative challenge was I wanted to create 7 characters that were horrible people, despicable, mean, horrible people with absolutely no redeeming qualities. Now, this into itself isn't hard to do, but I wanted to make these despicable people the main characters, the characters that the player played as. And I wanted the players to be completely complicit in the horrible deeds these 7 characters did. It's like I wanted players to feel uncomfortable with what they were doing. Now, the game came out to very mixed reviews, and it didn't sell particularly well, but at some level, that just doesn't bother me. It's like, yeah, I would have rathered the game sold well and got great reviews, but it is a game that I will dance naked on top of. It's a game that I just don't care what anyone else thinks about. And the creative journey can be a very painful journey. You're bearing your soul to the world. But if you believe in what you're making, if you are uncompromising, if you can dance naked on top of it, then it just doesn't matter. So I wanted to talk a little bit about the genesis of Monkey Island. It's like where it came from and how it ended up being what it is, and really the story of that journey. Now, Gary Winnick and I had just finished working on Maniac Mansion, and I spent a year after that working on the SCUM system, supporting David Fox and Zach McCracken and the Alien Mindbenders. Now, the SCUM system was this programming language and development environment that I created to get Maniac Mansion done, and it would go on to power every adventure game that Lucasfilm did until Grim Fandango. Now, during this process, I started thinking about my next game. I knew it was going to be an adventure game. It's like after Maniac Mansion, I was completely hooked on making adventure games, and there really was no going back. Now, when I'm trying to come up with a new idea for a game, I'll write a lot of one-page design documents, and I'll write them as fast as I can, just in one sitting. Now, I was trying to find an idea I liked, and I had an adventure game concept called Space Party Aliens. And this was about these 2 aliens named Pesto and Basil that flew around the galaxy looking for parties. and their ship was powered by the tears of these cute aliens they kept locked up down below. I didn't say these were good ideas. The point is just to design stuff. It's like write down your ideas, no matter how crazy and stupid they are. Now, the other idea I had was a game called Commit the Perfect Murder. It was an adventure game that took place in an enclosed environment, like a cruise ship or some secluded mountain resort. And it followed in the tradition of the Agatha Christie novels or Murder, She Wrote. Now, a group of people thrown together, unable to communicate with the outside world, and a murder is committed. Now, the twist on the idea was that you were not the smart detective that was trying to solve the murder. You were the murderer. And the game was divided into 2 acts. In Act 1, you planned and you plotted the murder. You had to track everyone's movements and set up your alibi and plant some false evidence, whatever you thought you needed to get away with the crime. You would then commit the murder and hopefully not get caught in the act. Now, just by chance, there happens to be a famous detective among your group, and he or she is now going to solve the crime that you just committed. Now, during this part of the game, you'll be questioned by the detectives. You also have the opportunity to go around and plant more false evidence, cover your tracks, as the detective is narrowing in on you. Now, the game had a built-in difficulty mode. You get to decide which of the 10 or 20 people you wanted to kill. At one end was the cook, who you'd never met before, and you had no reason to kill him whatsoever. This was easy mode. On the other end was your husband or wife that was about to divorce you and leave you penniless, and this was hard mode. And you had all the motivation in the world to kill them. And then there was everyone else in between. Now, as was tradition back at Lucasfilm Games, we pass these one-pagers around and see what stuck with people. And everybody loved to commit the perfect murder idea. And I presented it to my boss, and his reaction was, "A great idea, I love it, but Lucasfilm cannot make a game about committing a murder." So I was really back to square one. Now, a lot of people look back at Maniac Mansion as this touchstone game, this adventure game that launched the entire point-and-click genre. But it never sold very well, and that was always very frustrating to me. It's like Sierra Online was the big adventure game powerhouse in those days, and they were selling 10 times the number of King's Quests that we were selling in Maniac Mansion. And much like today, fantasy sold, and it sold big, from RPGs to adventure games. The problem that I had was that I really hated fantasy. And it's like I still do. I'm just not a big fan of the genre, but it's what sold. And I needed to find something that embodied what people loved about fantasy, but it wasn't fantasy. And the first thing that jumped into my mind were pirates. Now, around the time this idea was bubbling up in my mind, I took a trip to Disneyland. And since I was a kid, I've always loved the Pirates of the Caribbean ride. As I went on that ride again and again, I was really struck by the mood and the feel. How the ride starts out in the bayou and slowly takes you into towns and the worlds of pirates and caves filled with treasure. And I knew this was the feeling I wanted from my pirate game. And I went on that ride over and over again, trying to absorb everything that I could about it. Now, I didn't really have a name yet, and that really bugged me. I just called it the Pirate Game. Then one day, while I was hanging out with a friend, and he told a stupid joke. It's not even a joke. It's really just a quick one-liner. And he said it quickly, and he never said it again. He said, "Hey, welcome to Monkey Island. Grab a chimp and grind your organ." It's a stupid joke. It's a sophomoric, a junior high school joke. It's like, welcome to Monkey Island. Grab a chimp and grind your organ. But when I heard Monkey Island, I knew that that was the name I was looking for the game. I think the point is that ideas can come from anywhere. It's like you always have to have your mind open to everything that might flow into them. Now, a lot of great ideas start out as stupid ideas until they get molded and shaped. And the name Monkey Island is just one of those things. It was a crude joke an 11-year-old would tell, but there was a nugget in there. It's like, okay, so I had a name and I had a setting, and the rest is just going to be easy. So I started out writing a lot of short stories about pirates, just quick or 1 or 2 page stories. I was trying to find something that clicked with me, and I was just getting nowhere. I It was frustrating and it was agonizing. But at least for me, that it really is a part of the creative process. When you're creating something, you are truly digging into your soul. You're exposing yourself, and it's very intimidating. And I think if you're not, you're probably not trying hard enough. Now, I spent weeks writing short stories, and I had a lot of fragments of good ideas, but nothing that really held them all together. I didn't have a main character yet, and that's something that's critical to an adventure game, since the main character is really an extension of the player. And I spent time in my office writing, I spent time at home writing, I spent time at a friend's house on the coast writing, and it was not going well. And I was starting to think that the Space Party Aliens idea was actually looking pretty good right about now. But eventually I was saved. Not a good idea, but my boss telling me that it really needed David Fox and Noah Falstein and I to make the Indiana Jones and the Last Crusade adventure game. Now the movie was coming out, and for some reason the rights had reverted back to Lucasfilm, and they needed an adventure game, and they needed it really fast. And I cannot tell you what a relief that was, to be able to put Monkey Island aside for 9 months while I worked on something else. It really was a godsend. Now, during this time I spent working on Indiana Jones, 2 important things happened. The first was that I read a book called On Stranger Tides by Tim Powers. That was a book about pirates that contained this wonderful fish-out-of-water story for a main character. And more importantly, it had voodoo in it. Now, when I got done reading that book, it's like everything fell into place. It's like all those months of writing and failing and torment just fell into place. The main character should show up not being a pirate, but wanting to be a pirate. And the villain needs to be wrapped in voodoo and magic. Now, the second important thing that happened was I really started to look at adventure game design. Now, when Gary Winnick and I did Maniac Mansion, the design for that was a complete clusterfuck. Gary and I, we had no idea what we were doing. We just threw out ideas and hoped things would work. Puzzles were just random collections of ideas that we naively hoped would all fit together. With Indiana Jones, David and Noah and I really started to look at the structure and the language for adventure games. I came up with this concept called the puzzle dependency chart that mapped out all of the adventure game puzzles. I also formulated my 15 rules for adventure game design, and I published an article called Why Adventure Games Sucked. And the article became the template for the entire design of Monkey Island. It's like I followed all 15 of those rules religiously. Now, when Indiana Jones was done, I was ready to start on Monkey Island, and I mapped out the basic story and the backbone puzzles. The backbone puzzles are the puzzles that drive the narrative in an adventure game. It's like movies are made of scenes and books are made of chapters, but adventure games are defined by those backbone puzzles. These are the large puzzles that, when solved, push the story in a new direction. Now, all the other puzzles are just filler. They're just meat on the backbone. You can grow and shrink those puzzles at will, but the backbone puzzles are what holds everything together. And we then hired Tim Schafer and Dave Grossman as programmers, and Steve Purcell was slated to do much of the art and animation. Now, despite having the story and the backbone puzzles, I had a main character, but he had no name. I didn't know what to call him. It's like nothing fit. The game was well underway, and he had no name. We would just call him Guy. The guy does this, and the guy does that. The guy needs to find a ship. The guy needs to learn how to sword fight. Now, Steve Purcell was doing character concepts for the guy in this tool called dpaint. And you could grab a section of the image into what dpaint called a brush, and you could save it off. Now, Steve Purcell would send me these small files and approve the main character. Now, since we didn't have a name, Steve would just call these files guybrush.lbm. I'll let that sink in for a minute. So I spent weeks looking at these files called guybrush.lbm. At one point I said, let's just call him Guybrush. Tim and Dave thought I was nuts, but I'm the decider, so I get to decide those things. So now we had a first name for Guybrush, but we needed a last name. Dave Grossman suggested Threepwood because it was a D&D character that his brother used to play. And after you're naming your main character after a file name, there really is only up. And Guybrush Threepwood was born. Now, the creative journey is a strange mistress. It's like you have to be willing to open your mind and consciousness to every idea and thought, no matter how stupid and silly. The key to creativity isn't being able to think things up. It's being able to be open and let ideas flow and knowing which ones to use and then which ones to remember for later. It's like you should never throw away ideas. You should just remember them for later. It's like you also need to be willing to endure the pain of failure. It's like I spent several tormented months trying to come up with the genesis for Monkey Island. But if I had not taken that trip into my own personal pit of despair, when I read On Stranger Tides, I just would have put the book down, thought it was a good story, and moved on. But instead, when I did finish reading that book, everything made sense to me. It was immediate and it was overwhelming. And within a half an hour of finishing that book, everything fell into place. I just knew exactly what I needed to do. Now for me, it's probably not true for everyone, but for me, something is perfect not when everybody loves it, but when half the people love it and half the people hate it. Now I'm not saying that creating something everyone loves is easy, but in some ways it really is the easy way out. It's like if you want to create something everybody likes, take a picture of a cute puppy and a kitten. Everybody loves puppies, but what have you really told the world? You've told the world that puppies are cute. How have you challenged your audience? What part of their imagination have you fired up? What part of their soul have you stirred and engaged? Now for me, such a thing is the ending to Monkey Island 2. That ending really polarized people. Half the people loved that ending, and half the people just hated that ending. And really nothing could make me happier. Now the basic gist of that ending is this, for those of you who haven't played it. Guybrush has been battling the evil pirate LeChuck for 2 games now, and we finally come to the final showdown. They both find themselves in these strange concrete tunnels on Dinky Island, and LeChuck is tormenting Guybrush with a voodoo doll. Now Guybrush is slowly making his own voodoo doll of LeChuck through the magic of puzzle solving. And once his doll is complete, Guybrush begins poking at it, but it isn't having any effect on the evil pirate LeChuck. So Guybrush pulls the leg off the doll, and LeChuck falls to the floor. Now at this point, the game becomes a complete parody of the scene of Return of the Jedi, where Luke pulls the mask off of Darth Vader to see the true face of his father. It's like if Lucasfilm wasn't going to let us make Star Wars games, then we were going to make fun of Star Wars. That'll show George. So LeChuck is lying on the floor, missing a leg and on the brink of death, and he begs Guybrush to come over and remove his mask. So reluctantly, Guybrush kneels down beside the legless Chuck and removes his mask to find his brother, Chucky. Now Guybrush asks LeChuck why he hates him so much, and Chucky/LeChuck says it's because Guybrush broke his Ultra Soldier Commando assault vehicle. Now before things can get too sappy, a janitor comes in and says, "Hey, you kids, you can't be down here." We then cut to an amusement park, and these 2 kids come out of a door and meet their parents, who are upset that they've run off to play, and we are clearly not in pirate times. Now, as the 4 of them walk off screen to ride a roller coaster, and just as Chucky/LeChuck gets to the center of the screen, he turns to the cameras, and his eyes glow with little sparks of voodoo magic. And the game just ends there. Now, to this day, not a week goes by that I do not get 1 or 2 hate and profanity-filled emails from people over that ending. It's like I also get emails from people that tell me how much they loved that ending. And that ending really polarized people, and that it means the ending meant something. It's like I could have done an ending where Guybrush and Elaine live happily ever after, but no one would be talking about that ending 20 years later. No one would be sending me ranty emails about how much they loved how happy Guybrush and Elaine were. And ranty emails really start my day. In a lot of ways they are my morning coffee. Now the thing is, I didn't really have an ending for Monkey Island 2 for a long time. We were almost done with the game, and I still had no ending. It's like I didn't have a bad ending that I hope I make better, or a mediocre ending. I just had no ending, and I was starting to panic. Now panic can be an amazing motivator. Panic and fear are often the lubrication of the creative engine. So then one morning, I was laying in bed, and I was just staring at the ceiling, and the ending to Monkey Island 2 just hit me. Not with all the details like the Star Wars parody, but the basic gist of it. And it just felt absolutely perfect. It was odd and it was strange, and I knew a lot of people would just hate it. But I also knew a lot of people would love it. And it just felt right. It was kind of the ending that the game was waiting for. So next morning, I got back to the office, and I sat down with Tim and Dave and Steve Purcell, and we worked through all the details. I don't remember who came up with the Return of the Jedi parody, but it was perfect, and it just fit. It's like when you're creating something, it's like don't be afraid to enrage your audience. Don't be afraid to make them hate you. Don't be afraid to challenge them and make them feel uncomfortable. It means you're creating something that has meaning. Now, you don't want to do this all the time. It's like you want to do it just enough to keep everybody thinking and unsuspecting. And art should challenge us. Art should make us think, and it should make us examine who we are. Art is an object riddled with sharp edges that can cut you. It's like you can pound all those edges away and make it smooth and make it safe, but what you're left with is just this shapeless blob. It's safe, and it's smooth, but it's uninteresting. Now, you shouldn't enrage your audience all the time just to enrage them. You need to enrage them for a reason. Now, it's like I love cute pictures of puppies just as much as everyone else, but I also like to read or watch or play things that make me stop and think, what the fuck was that? It's like I never want to watch or play that again, but I can't stop thinking about it. Now, at the beginning of Maniac Mansion, while the three kids are gathered out in front of the mansion ready to go in and rescue Dave's girlfriend, Dave says to Bernard, "Don't be a tuna head." Now, it's an odd, strange line. It's like, why would Dave call Bernard a tuna head? It's like, what is a tuna head? Now, when I originally wrote that line, it was, "Don't be a shithead." Now, after the line had been in the game for a few weeks, my boss called me into the office and he told me I needed to remove it, that I can't swear in a Lucasfilm game. Now, of course, I was completely indignant over this. It's like, how dare he mess with my creative vision? I was 21 years old, and I guess swearing was still cool to me. Maybe it made the game feel more grown up, or less like something for kids if I said the word shit. And I argued for hours over this. Now, finally he said to me, it's like, okay, you go off and you think about this, and if you can come up with a good reason why you need to say the word shit, I'll let you leave it in. And I was feeling fairly triumphant, so I headed out to hone my arguments and come up with a reason why I needed to say shit in Maniac Mansion. And I thought about it long and hard. I thought about it for weeks. And you know what? I couldn't come up with a good reason. Was Dave calling Bernard a shithead really adding anything to the story of the characters? Did it really make the game more authentic or real? Did it tell the players something about Dave or something about Bernard? I was like, no, it really didn't. I couldn't come up with a good reason to leave it in. So I finally removed it, and feeling a little bit defeated, I just replaced it with "Don't be a tuna head." I didn't think it was a particularly good line. It was written mostly in spite. It's like, well, if I can't swear, I'm just going to say something stupid. But the thing is, looking back on it 25 years later, "Don't be a tuna head" is a much better line. It's like you Google it, and you get thousands upon thousands of results back. And it ended up being one of the most memorable lines of the game. It's like you can buy T-shirts that say "Don't be a tuna head" on them. Now, what that line has meant to me over the years, and what it kind of represent, is this notion of constraints can sometimes be a really good thing. It's like if you can do anything you want, it's easy to become lazy or do the first thing that comes into your head. And if you ever find yourself working with hard constraints, they can be fun to push and pull against and see how far that you can take them. If you can let your mind go, they can be really liberating. Now, when I left Lucasfilm in 1992, I started a company called Humongous Entertainment. And we made games for kids. And they weren't just any games, but they were adventure games. They were games like Puppet Saves a Zoo and Freddy Fish and Pajama Sam. Now, the whole idea of starting a company that made adventure games for kids came from one event, and that was watching a 5-year-old play Monkey Island. Now, at 5 years old, he couldn't read, and this was before voicing games, so he had no idea what was happening in the story or the game. Now, he couldn't even read the verbs at the bottom of the screen. But since it was a pure point-and-click game, all he had to do was move the mouse pointer around and click on things and see what happened. He soon figured out that clicking on one verb and then clicking on the door would open it, and clicking on another verb and clicking on the door would close it, or clicking on this other verb and clicking on something on the ground would add it to your inventory. Now, this 5-year-old spent hours walking around Melee Island, clicking on stuff, and he was getting nowhere in the story, and he had no idea what was happening. But it was fascinating, and it completely absorbed him. And I have no doubt that he made up a completely different story for what was happening, but he was happily lost in that world. Now, it's important to understand, this is around 1992, and kids have not had the same exposure to computers they have today. And this was all new, and it was different, and he really loved it. And it got me thinking. It's like, what if I made adventure games just for kids? Not dumbed-down adventure games or crappy edutainment games, but real adventure games, simplified and done with full voice. And I was convinced that kids and parents would absolutely love them. Now, the first game we made was about a talking purple car called Putt-Putt Joins the Parade. Then when we finished that, we made another game called Putt-Putt Goes to the Moon and then Fatty Bear's Birthday Surprise. And kids loved these games, and they loved adventure games. It's like they didn't know they were adventure games. They were just fun stories with characters where they had to think and solve problems. Now, a year later, we started working on a new game with a new character called Freddy Fish. Now, if you look at the screenshots for Putt-Putt Joins the Parade, you notice that the art and graphics are very much in the same vein as Monkey Island, or just about any other game at the time. They're just built on pixels. Now, about halfway through the production of Freddy Fish, I went to this conference, and I saw a talk given by someone from another game company, and he was making games for kids. I don't remember the company or the game, but the guy giving the talk showed some of the art, and how it was all hand-drawn on paper, and then it was scanned in like traditional film animation. And it was stunning. It had a completely different feel to it. It was still made of pixels, but these were sexy pixels. I had never seen a game do this before, not for kids or adults. And when I sat in this talk, the stream of panic enveloped me. It's like what we were doing could not compare to this. In that one instant, everything we were doing seemed old and dated. And when I got back to the office, I gathered up all the artists, and I told them what I had seen, and I asked them if they thought we could do the same thing. Now, none of them had any classic training in animation, but they jumped on it. It's like we did a few tests, and they looked absolutely amazing. At this point, we scrapped all of the art in the game and completely started over. It's like we kept the design and the story and the script, but every piece of art was scrapped, from animation to backgrounds, and we completely started over. We wrote all new tools for dealing with the art and completely revamped our engine. The first 3 games we did sold well, but when Freddy Fish came out, it was a huge hit, and it really was our breakout game. It got great reviews, and the art and animation was really singled out. It was the game that put Humongous Entertainment on the map, and we became a company that was known for our art and animation. Now, if you were an artist in Seattle at the time, it really was the place you wanted to work. It's like we had the best of the best. And all of that because I went to a conference and I saw a game that scared the crap out of me. I don't know if that game ever came out, but it scared me, and it challenged me, and it jolted me out of complaisance, and it made us better. You should always be looking for things that make us better, looking for ideas that challenge our thinking and try to tear away at our view of the world. And as creators, we should seek out things that are different and scary. Ideas that make us afraid are wonderful sources of inspiration. Now, this feeds into another saying that I have about the creative process that is 128 degrees from what I just talked about. And that is a saying, when you get to the point that you don't give a damn, that's where the magic happens. And it's the complete opposite of the fear postulate, but it works in the same way, because it causes you to shift your thinking, to imagine what was not imaginable before. Now, fear does this by smacking you upside the head, but the I don't give a damn does this by freeing you from caring. Now, both of these things shut off that ugly part of our minds that fills us with self-doubt, that conscious part of the mind that keeps us in check and tries to not let us get out of control. But creativity demands that we be out of control. It's like it almost requires it. Now, Maniac Mansion is another interesting examination of the creative process, not because of the laser focus that Gary Winnick and I had about the story, not because we set out to change the face of adventure games with a point-and-click interface, not because of our vision of designing and telling 7 interweaving stories. What's fascinating about the creation of Maniac Mansion is that it's absolutely none of those things. Now, when Gary and I started brainstorming some ideas for a game, one of them was about a group of teenagers that go into this creepy mansion in search of a friend, and we called it Maniac Mansion. We wrote up a story, and Gary created some art. We made a lot of jokes, but we didn't really have a game. We didn't know what the game was. It was just a game about a bunch of kids that go into a mansion, but that's not a game. And we fumbled around the issues, and we made up some more stuff, told some more jokes. Gary drew some more art. We loved the story and the characters, but we had no game. Now, that Christmas, I went to visit my aunt and uncle, and I was watching my 8-year-old nephew play a game called King's Quest. Now, I watched him in complete fascination. And I played a lot of text adventures, but this was the first time that I'd seen an adventure game with graphics and animation. And everything about Maniac Mansion just fell into place and became clear. It's like I suddenly knew how all these odd and disconnected ideas that Gary and I had would fit together. In that quick spark of an instant, Maniac Mansion became an adventure game. But we still had no game design. It's like Gary and I had never designed a game before, let alone an adventure game. So we kept adding playable characters just because they sounded fun, and we added multiple endings because, really, how hard can this be, right? We created puzzles because they sounded funny, and we worried about hooking them all up later because, really, how hard can this be? We created a big map of the mansion with sheets of acetate that overlaid each other with the different characters, character layers and characters and puzzles on them. You can actually see this map in Weird Ed's bedroom. We were so proud of this map that we actually put it in the game. Now, the one thing I hated playing about King's Quest was the parser. I hated playing this meta game called Second Guess the Parser. Was this thing on the screen a bush or a plant or a shrub? It's like, what did the game designer call it? So Gary and I got rid of the parser, and we just moved all the verbs to the bottom of the screen. Really, how hard can any of this be? As it turns out, really hard. Now, the game was late, and I almost got fired. I scrapped all of the 6502 code I'd written, and I created this scripting language called Scum, because, how hard can that be? We fought the puzzles and the stories and the characters and the way they all interacted with each other. It's like we had no plan. The game was a complete clusterfuck. It's like, what were we thinking? As it turns out, we weren't thinking. And that turned out to be our greatest strength. It's like Gary and I were truly too stupid to know that it couldn't be done. It's like sheer ignorance had turned off the part of our brain that completely tells you that you won't succeed. We were just stupid. Now, Maniac Mansion became this seminal point in adventure games, and it launched the entire point-and-click adventure genre, and not because of vision or brilliance, but because of stupidity and ignorance. Now, I would never be able to make that game today. It's like I know too much. It's like I'm too smart. It's like the grand struggle of creativity can often be about making yourself stupid again. It's like turning yourself into a child that views the world with wonderment and excitement. Now, creating something meaningful isn't easy. It's hard. But that's why we should do it. It's like if you ever find yourself being comfortable in what you're making or creating, then you need to push yourself. Push yourself out of your comfort zone and push yourself to the point of failure and then beyond. When I was a kid, we would go skiing a lot. And at the end of the day, all the skiers would come into the lodge. And I used to think it was the bad skiers that were covered in snow. And it was the good skiers that were all clean with no snow on them. But it turns out to be the exact opposite is true. It was the good skiers that were covered in snow from pushing themselves beyond the limits and then to their breaking point, getting better and then pushing themselves harder. And creativity is the same thing. It's like you push hard, you push until you're scared and afraid, you push until you break, you push until you fall, and then you get up and you do it again. Creativity is really a journey. It's a wonderful journey that you start out as one person and that you end as another. Now, one of the things that always strikes me whenever I come to PAX is the creativity of everyone who comes here. It's like maybe you don't make video games, but you write stories, you have a funny blog, you draw, or you make amazing costumes. That's like you are consumers and not just creators. And that's something we should all strive to be, creators. It's something that you give to the world, you take an idea and you give an idea. It's like you feed everybody as you feed yourself. And it doesn't have to be grand or epic. It's like small and personal can often be better because it's honest and it's real and it's meaningful. It's like when you make something, it has the power to change you. It has the power to change other people. Now, I think if there's one thing that you should take away from the last hour, it's that I have no idea what I'm talking about. Creativity is a personal journey, and it's different for everybody, and this is just mine. Now, yours may be the same, or it may be completely different, but you will not be the same person when the journey is over. That I do know. Well, thank you for welcoming me to Australia. Thank you for coming to PAX, and thank you for being who you are and loving games, and thank you for making things. Thank you. And I leave you with this. Thank you.